I think I may have overstated things a little bit for you all when I said I was going to be obnoxious today, because you all must have thought I was going to come like in full headdress or something, red painted face. So I got to tell you that as far as preaching goes, this is about as obnoxious as I can bring myself to be. I don't know what it is, because I've preached many times for youth groups and for summer camps, but I cannot bring myself to wear like certain things while I'm preaching. Shorts. I can do that for youth groups. I can do that at camp, but I can't do that on Sunday morning for some reason. I don't know. There's been like one time that I can remember that I wasn't wearing a button-down shirt to preach in. And so this is pretty obnoxious for me. And I'm sure that you're going to find out as we go through the service, it's going to be more about my words than it is about anything else. I did look online to see what Patrick Mahomes' hair would cost me, but since I'd only wear it today, $35 was a little too much for me to spend. So I thought I better not do that. And my jersey here is courtesy of my son, who spent too much and bought this for me for Christmas. So this is courtesy of Nathan, which I'm sure it hurt him just so much to buy Chiefs, right? So we just heard the Beatitudes from Ross. Does anybody have any trouble with these sayings? I started off by talking about this as the greatest sermon ever told. But is it? Because a lot of what Jesus says doesn't really make a lot of sense. Happy are the hopeless. Happy are the hopeless? Really? How? And so it got me thinking, is there any other way that we can look at this? And if you'll indulge me and give me a little latitude, I think we can have some fun this morning, okay? I'm going to have Deb put the scripture up on the screen as I read it. The words that I have replaced are darkened, so you can see what they are. If you want to see it in its original form, you can look in the bulletin to see what I've done. But I'm going to read it without those words. I'm just going to read it with what I replaced it with. Okay, are you ready? Here's the first one. Happy are the Chicago Bears, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Okay, now let me tell you why. I have known a lot of Chicago fans over my life. Are there any Chicago fans in here? Chicago Bear fans? Yeah. So I'll be gentle, I promise. Chicago fans, whether it's the Bears or the Cubs or the Blackhawks, it doesn't matter. They are the most hopeless people on the planet. And here's what I mean by that. They always believe that this is the year that they're going to win it all. Always, every year. This is the year we're going to win it all. And about 3 games in, they're like, well, next year. And so while being the most hopeless fans ever, they're the most hopeful fans ever. They're the only ones I know that can be both at the same time. The hopeless and the hopeful at the same time. Because their team is going to win next year. All right. Happy are the Green Bay Packers, because they will be made glad. Now, Packer fans are actually in a pretty good place right now, even though they're grieving the loss that they suffered 2 weeks ago. They're in a good place. I know this because this is exactly where Kansas City was a year ago, right? I understand this well. I mean, it looks, it really is terrible. It just sucks to come this close to the big game and to not make it. I get that. But like I said, I experienced this last year. And what I also experienced was that while watching the Super Bowl, as the fan of the team that just barely didn't make it, is you can't lose today because you're not there. Actually, you can't lose today because you have 2 ways that you will win. You will either be happy that your team lost to the team that won the Super Bowl, or you'll be happy that the team that beat you is tasting the same thing, right? All right. Happy are the Cincinnati Bengals, because they will inherit the earth. Now, Cincinnati has the most notorious label of being the worst team in the NFL. They were 2-14 this year. 2-14. That's really bad. And so because they were really bad, they get their choice of players coming out of college. They're number one in the draft. And so all eyes are on them to pick the player that will help them the most, or several players that will bring them to the top of the league next year, right? And experts think that they'll probably take a quarterback by the name of Joe Burrow out of LSU. Perhaps he can turn this team around. Probably not, but we'll see, right? All right. Happy are the Dallas Cowboys, because they will be fed until they are full. Now, Dallas's big news is that they have hired a new coach in Mike McCarthy, who used to be with the Packers. And, they have been hungry for a long time, since the 80s when they were dominant, when they were a dynasty, right? And they still claim to be America's team, and they still have a very broad fan base. But, no one is lukewarm about the Dallas Cowboys. You either love them or you don't. But there's no with the Dallas Cowboys. And they have many of the tools in place. So with the acquisition of this new coach, it seems that they're positioning themselves to feast for the next few seasons. Happy are the New Orleans Saints, because they will receive mercy. Now this is probably the biggest stretch of all of them. Because New Orleans was probably the most unfairly treated team last year in 2018. They missed the Super Bowl by one play, when it was really clear that there was pass interference, but it didn't get called. And, they're still talking about that play. It was so clear that the NFL changed their rules because of this one play to allow coaches to throw a challenge when the referees didn't call a penalty. And that doesn't happen in any other instance. This is the only penalty or non-call that can be challenged. And it was designed to give mercy to teams that find themselves in the place of the Saints. So they have not had any mercy, but they will experience mercy. Except that that's not how it happened. This didn't clear things up at all. And the ironic thing is that the Saints were hit with another non-pass interference call in their playoff game this year. It didn't get overturned, and so they still didn't make it to the end. No mercy again. Well, okay, so next year, right? Happy are the Jacksonville Jaguars, for they will see God. Now this one doesn't really have anything to do with the team at all, but with the show The Good Place. Anybody watch The Good Place? So The Good Place is one of the running jokes on this TV show. It just ended this week. You could probably stream it if you want. But for the entirety of the show, there's this character on there named Jason who is a devout fan of the Jaguars. He is like the biggest fan you've ever seen. And he keeps talking about how Blake Bortles is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. And he would, everything. He's the greatest quarterback in history. And when Bortles was traded in the offseason, fans of The Good Place were all wondering, what would Jason do? How would they handle this? Or is he going to be just sad or whatever? He's in The Good Place. How could he be sad? Well, he's so purely a Jaguars fan that he immediately jumped on the Nick Foles bandwagon, like everybody else that's ever had Nick Foles come to their team. And, of course, Jason's in a good place, so he's got to love that, right? Happy are the New York Giants, because they will be called God's children. Man, Giants fans have had a rough year. They lost Odell Beckham Jr., right, who didn't want to play for them anymore. Eli Manning struggled all year. There was so much talk about the lack of peace in their locker room. Do they bench their legendary quarterback? Did they try to go with somebody new? What could they do? And even so, they weren't the worst team this year. So Eli decided to retire. And this is probably the best thing, because with Eli retiring, the fans are able to celebrate Eli rather than calling for him to sit. They're able to celebrate Eli in his 2 Super Bowl victories, while also looking forward to the next chapter in the team. Peace at last. My own team doesn't have 2 Super Bowl victories, right? Well, yet. Happy are the Miami Dolphins, the harassed ones, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, the Miami Dolphins were derided this year. They were, even though they ended up winning 5 games, they started the season 0-8. And people started speculating that the one team who went 16-0 might go 0-16. They really thought that that might happen. Now, of course, their most important win of the season, and the reason that I say that the kingdom of heaven is theirs, is because on the last game of the season, they beat the Patriots, which knocked them out of the highly favored set 2 seed, put the Chiefs there, and gave them the first round bye and home field advantage all the way through. So thank you to the Dolphins. All right, last one. Happy are the Detroit Lions, because you will have a great reward in heaven. Now, I think that heaven is probably the only place where the Lions and their fans will be rewarded. They have believed for many years that they had the pieces in place for a championship run. They gave their quarterback a few years ago, Matthew Stafford, an enormous contract. At the time, it was the largest contract that had ever been awarded. It was $135 million over 5 years. Crazy big. And they believed that he would take them to the Super Bowl. Well, they went 3-12 this year. They went 6-10 last year. They were 9-7 the previous 2 years. And as my dad can attest, they always disappoint. Always. He's been well, he's no longer a Lions fan. He was a Lions fan for 60 years. And he finally gave it up just a few years ago. He came in one day and declared, "They are dead to me." And it was because they always found a way to blow whatever lead they had. It seemed like every Thanksgiving, because they always play on Thanksgiving Day, the Lions would have this comfortable lead, and then we'd turn off the TV and we'd go eat our Thanksgiving dinner. We'd come back and we'd turn it on, and they would be losing. Even if they were up by like 3 touchdowns, they would be losing when we came back, and he couldn't take it anymore. They're dead to me. Perhaps they will get their reward, but it'll probably have to be in the next life. All right, so where's the good news in this? Especially for those of you who are not football fans. I think that one of the things that Jesus is getting at is that nothing in this life is permanent. These states of hardship are temporary. If you're grieving, you won't grieve forever. If you're hopeless, you won't be this way forever. If you're hungry, this too shall pass. And this is true on the positive side too. People who have everything going for them will experience hardship at some point in their life. Successful businesses fail. Dynasties end. Just ask New England and Buffalo and Dallas and Pittsburgh. Right? Dynasties end. And so to this crowd of ordinary people that Jesus is talking to, Jesus is assuring them that God has their back, that things will get better. Ups and downs, they're a part of life. And I think that one of the things that happens to us as Christians is we think that once we accept Christ, we're always going to have these high moments. Life is going to be hunky-dory for all time. And that just doesn't happen. Being a Christian doesn't guarantee that it will all be Super Bowls and victory parties. There will be hard times. But in the good times and in the bad, the playoffs or the first position in the draft, God is there with us. And we are there for each other. God understands our suffering. Which is good news for 49ers fans today. Would you pray with me, please? God, we thank you that you understand our highs and our lows, our happiness and our suffering. Thank you for telling us that, for showing us ways in which we can't imagine ever coming out of the suffering that we are feeling, and learning that these days are numbered. But more importantly, that while we're in it, while we're experiencing those hard times, that we are not alone. That we are together in this, that we are with you, and that your promise is assured. So help us lean into that. Help us lean into your arms as we experience the good and the bad, and hope for a better tomorrow. In your name we pray.